All right. This is the JCS show with Mike Fed. Uh, Before I dive into asking you questions and stuff, I always kind of just outlay the context. So you're my mom's cousin, I, and s- and you were around a lot when I was a kid. You'd stay at our house for periods of time when you were in between things, and you were a big traveler. So you'd be coming back from a big trip and getting ready for another one, and kind of bridging the gap. And I always looked forward to those times. I don't know how many times you came around, but it was always exciting for me. Um, you're you're like a bit younger than my mom, so I kind of felt like you were one of my cousins. I've got two cousins myself. Shout out Aiden and Anna. Um, I didn't see them a lot growing up, so you kind of were kind of an uncle, kind of a cousin. It was like you were kind of that fun age where like you were a mentor, but also like I felt like we could like hang out, and you were a little goofier than some of my other uncles at the time.
A
Um,
little bit less mature than other adults.
yeah. Yeah, and you were always really good at keeping things entertaining. I remember like there was one day we've talked about it a lot of times since then, but you just did a whole scavenger hunt for soy or chocolate soy milk. It was like you're just good at like creating games out of nothing and keeping me, Zoe, Maggie, my sisters entertained. Um, so yeah, I appreciate your mentorship growing up, and not you've always been a farmer, and I've got a lot of questions about farming, nutrition, sustainability. So that's kind of my agenda here is to learn as much as I can in those fronts, and I think you've got a lot of that. Um, so yeah, thanks for coming on.
Cool. Yeah, yeah. I think when you were little and I was staying at your house a lot, I was it was during like a period of time when I was a farm apprentice, and so I didn't obviously I didn't grow up on a farm, but like so I the apprentice jobs would kind of be like from maybe March until Halloween or Thanksgiving, and then they would have like a few months. I'd have to like save up and then have a few months off, and I would visit family and travel and stuff like that, and kind of over the winter time. So those were the times when I would like really be lucky that I get to spend like big chunks of time in Baltimore with you guys.
Yeah, yeah, it was always a lot of fun for me. Um, So, anyways, I don't have like a specific questions. I just sort of have general things I want to ask. So I'll just kind of get into it and see where it goes. But yeah, I guess to start, what are you working on now? So what farming are you doing these days?
Yes, I just started a new job like 2 weeks ago for the Denver public school system. So I'm like a farmer so I'm growing food, vegetables, carrots and beets and cucumbers, things like that go into that are going to go into the school lunch program.
Okay,
Um,
and then
so that's like a new thing I'm just starting.
yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah.
And so diving into that a little bit, I kind of want to pick at your kind of farming mindset. So I'll ask, when you start a job like that, I'm assuming you've got some gardens or like a certain plots of space that you're going to grow the food in. Like, how do you decide what crops to grow? What factors are you weighing? Are you weighing nutrition or preference or the soil quality, the season? What do you take into account?
All really, I mean, all the above. So this is kind of different from other farming that I've done. Where I was like my last farm that I had was a CSA and restaurant farm. So in that farm, a CSA farm, you kind of grow a little bit of everything. Like you have
Hmm.
maybe 50 different crops, and each week you have 10 things that are ready, and you're kind of juggling a lot of different things. And for the restaurant farm, it was more based on what the chefs wanted, like, and then that food goes into the kitchen for and gets plated up and stuff. But so this is a little bit different, where I'm going to be growing fewer number of things. Like maybe I'll be only be growing like 4 or 5 different crops. But the idea is to grow like a lot of. There's a lot of kids in Denver,
Hmm.
so in order to get a purple carrot on the plate of every single kid for lunch,
Yeah.
it's a lot of carrots or beets or whatever, whatever it is. So and I'm getting kind of a late start in the season. It's just June now, and I'm kind of just getting the field plowed and ready. So the crop, the world of the potential crops is kind of limited by what could we still grow this year? What could um, what crops will kind of fit into the gears of the school lunch program system for Denver public schools, about how they do things, like there's a lot of limiting factors in the school lunch program, and as far as like money, as far as labor, like the number of workers that work in the kitchens is, that's a kind of a big struggle to get people to work in those jobs nowadays. Or maybe it always has been. I'm not sure. I'm just kind of learning about
Yeah.
the backside of that,
Hmm.
these kind of programs now. But so it's like, oh, weird vet. So the idea of this program is to kind of grow things that kids aren't necessarily exposed to. So maybe it's a carrot, but like a different color carrot. Like maybe it's a purple carrot or a golden beet or a turnip that you can eat when it's raw and it tastes good. So kind of like it just exposing kids to a wider spectrum of things than they may have already seen at home.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
but also that doesn't require a lot of processing. Like it doesn't have to. It can just be kind of like chopped up and eaten raw, as opposed to like it has to be peeled or cooked or requires like extensive preparation.
Yeah,
Is sort of so that's kind of the goal for this year. Is sort of.
interesting. And then, um, it's so. You have a garden in your yard, correct?
Mhm.
So it's a
Yeah,
similar climate
we have a big garden at our house. Yeah,
and
that's kind
similar.
of like I'm slowly replacing all the plants with edible ones. Is sort of what.
That's
Um,
cool.
so it's like, oh, there's a bush in the front yard, but actually it's a currant bush. But it looks a lot like everybody else's bushes that don't do anything for them. But this bush
Hmm.
gives you berries or
Nice.
that kind
Yeah,
of thing.
that's cool. And so when you've got your own setup, how does that differ from when you're kind of like right now you're building for the school for the kids, you're growing for them. So when you're growing for yourself, what are the kind of differences?
So one of the things that I'm doing at the home garden is more, it has a difference between annuals and perennials. So annuals are plants you have to plant the seed every year,
Hmm.
and then like a cucumber or a tomato. Perennials are things that come back every year. So, and they're over time, you get basically more food for less work from them. So, like we have a lot of strawberry plants that come back every year, and raspberries, and there's this really cool plant. One of my favorite ones is called the Egyptian walking onion, which it kind of looks like a jumbo sized scallion, and then it makes like a flower, and then it falls over, and then the next year it kind of like comes up and like a foot or 2 feet away, and then it kind of over the years it kind of like walks around the garden
That's
and
cool.
sprouts new ones and kind of goes all around. And then there's other plants that just they come back every year because they make a lot of seeds. So there's this it's kind of like a cousin of spinach, what is called orac, ORACH. And it just in for like a month, 2 months in the spring, early summer, there's it's just like tons of it, and you cook it, it tastes like spinach, and then it goes to seed, and then it drops the seeds everywhere, and then next year you don't have to plant it or do anything, but it's more of like a little kind of like a wild situation as opposed to like a controlled. Oh, we need to have this many plants and want this much yield and need you know.
Yeah, that
It's more
I
like a permaculture kind of idea. I'm not sure if you've heard of that.
not what is I've heard of it, but I don't know exactly what it is.
It's kind of like a design idea of like just taking using the efficiencies found in nature to like make the most stuff, make the most food,
Yeah,
make the most habitat, make them out of with the least amount of input as possible.
gotcha. So
So it's like
sustainability.
annual plants need a lot of input. You need to like, prepare the soil and add compost and, do all the steps for growing them every year. But perennials are just kind of like asparagus or something like that, just comes back every year. And the work is just harvesting, not planting, weeding, harvesting.
What's the advantage of annual plans? As I know, like in business, like there's like fixed costs and variable costs, right? So it's a lot of times the longer term plays require like a more investment up front. Is it the same kind of thing? Is it more work and more effort, more time to get the perennials going compared to the annuals?
Yeah, so like think about like a print like a apple tree or something like that. Like an apple tree that's mature, that's 15 years
Yeah,
old or whatever, is going to produce like hundreds and hundreds of pounds of apples, but it's just there's a long lead time to that.
yeah,
So it's the annuals are kind of like yeah, that's it. I like that metaphor. It's like a short term. You get a good short term return, but it requires a lot of input of terms of labor and capital.
yeah. I was
But and there's also the other aspect I think with plants is the familiarity aspect. Like people are used to eating annual plants. That's just what we eat a lot of. We eat a lot of wheat and we eat a lot of corn and tomatoes and cucumbers and those kind of things. And a lot of the perennial foods that we could grow a lot of are less familiar. So they're kind of they're kind of a harder sell to get people to eat them.
On
Just kind
a
of, yeah, I think.
on a macro level, what do you think leads to that dynamic where like is it corn and wheat are just, I mean, obviously they're kind of staples, but yeah, why aren't there more perennial plants in the that people are used to if they kind of are more sustainable over time?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting question, I think, because there's actually a lot of research being done to with wheat, for example. There's a place called the Land Institute in Kansas, and they're working to turn wheat, which is an annual, so you have to plow it every year and use a lot. It's usually there's a lot of chemicals. They're actually trying to breed it into a perennial, so that you basically just have to harvest it every year. And so that has a lot of implications, like for carbon sequestration. Like when you're plowing, basically you're releasing carbon back up into the atmosphere. But perennial plants are doing photosynthesis, and then they take that carbon dioxide, they make turn it into sugar. And then most plants, like half of the sugar that they make through photosynthesis actually leaks out of the roots to feed the symbiotic soil biology, and then that carbon stays underground. So like that's why planting trees is good for sequestering carbon, because it takes carbon out of the atmosphere, sticks it underground. So the more, if we could transition our agriculture to be to have more perennials or grazing, or for the animals, like cows and things like that, we're grazing on pasture more instead of eating corn, then we could it would have dramatic influence on the sustainability side for sure, and actually the health side as well. There's a lot of studies about how grass-fed meat not only isn't it bad for you, but it's actually like has like positive health effects in terms of the omega-3 profiles and the different fats that are in grass-fed meat, grass finished meat, as opposed to even grass-fed and grain finished or feedlot meat.
What exactly is the difference between finished and fed? Um,
So if you think about like the spectrum of a cow's life, like a lot of cows, like baby calves, are born on pasture, and then but very quickly, like once they're weaned, then they go into a feedlot kind of situation, and then so then they're eating grain for most of their life, and then you could have a cow that is grass fed, but then maybe the last 60 days of its life, the market, like people are used to eating meat with certain marbling, or certain people like their steak to look a certain way. So to get more sort of consumer acceptance, they might spend the last month or 90 days of their life in a feedlot eating grain, and then the health qualities of that meat then goes down compared to a cow that spent 100% of its life on pasture. So grass
Interesting.
fed means it spent a lot of its life on a pasture eating grass, kind of as its digestive system and as it kind of evolved to do. But then grass finished, it means 100%.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm kind of asking that question from the frame of a personal trainer. I'm not a nutritionist, but a lot of my clients ask for nutrition tips and stuff like that. So it's interesting that like 60 days can really make a dramatic difference in the quality of the meat.
Mm-hmm.
When the cow lives for, I don't even know how many years, but a
Mm-hmm.
lot more than 60 days. So
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah,
interesting that
they may be a few years old, like two
two or
or
three.
three,
Okay.
depending on.
Yeah, so 60 days is a relatively short time to change the quality of the meat that
Mhm.
significantly.
Yeah,
Um,
but it's still better than a cow that ate grain their whole life. Like it's kind of the
yeah,
intermediate of
yeah.
level of.
And so that honestly kind of leads into a whole discussion I wanted to have with the quality of the nutrients in the soil, and like then the plants, and then for carnivores the end product of the meat. So can you walk me through a little bit? And you mentioned, I'm going to probably butcher it, but symbiotic soil. What was the word you said? Uh,
Um,
Symbiotic soil quality or something.
the symbiote, like the microbes in the soil.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
rhizosphere.
yeah. That so it's
Um,
in the soil. There's microbes. There's nutrients. What does healthy soil look like? What does unhealthy soil look like?
yeah.
What
Yes,
processes
that's a
lead to
big.
healthy and unhealthy? Yeah.
That's a lot of big questions. So I'll probably go on a tangent or two. So
Yeah.
maybe like, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, I joined this farmer organization called the Bionutrient Food Association. And I went to a bunch of classes and conferences and things like that. And they kind of, what I learned from them was about how there's a lot of variation in the food supply. Like not all carrots have the same amount of beta carotene or different vitamins and minerals in them that you think that you're eating when you eat a carrot. Like when you look, like the USDA Department of Agriculture has like a database that says, okay, carrots have this much beta carotene in them, but that's like an average of all the all their samples. And there can be people that study this have found there could be like 5x, 10x, 100x differences in minerals and nutrients, like the phytonutrients, depend in a plant. Depending on a lot of that is depending on how it's grown, and so you could, which I think is fascinating. Like, that basically nobody eats enough vegetables and fruit in a day. But if the vegetables and fruits that we are eating are like of poor quality, then there's going to be like compounding health effects on the population, right?
Yeah.
And so then so then when I went back to grad school a year ago to try to, and that was kind of like one of the things I wanted to see, like what does the science say about what do you need to do in order to grow that carrot that's like at the far end of the bell curve of quality, like what do you to grow the really really good carrot. And a lot of that has to do with there's not 100% sure. It's like there's a lot of different factors and it's a complicated thing, but it seems like what the science is saying now is that it has a lot to do with the soil biology. Like the more diverse bacteria, fungi in the soil is going to enable in its symbiosis with the plant, enable it to produce all those higher order phytonutrients and phytoalexins and anthocyanins and all those like the reason a lot of people want to eat blueberries is because of the anthocyanins. That's the antioxidant in the blueberries, but not all blueberries have the same amount of them. So, um, and then the tillage is the other thing, which kind of comes back to your question about annuals and perennials. So when you plow the soil or rototill it or whatever you do to prepare the soil for planting to get rid of the weeds, then that also kills a lot of soil biology. So you're killing the weeds, but you're also killing the soil biology. So then it leads to this kind of interesting paradigm where most of the time organic produce has higher levels of nutrients in them, but not 100% of the time, because the conventional farmers will spray herbicides to kill the weeds, and organic farmers a lot of times will do a lot of rototilling and plowing to kill the weeds. So when they're rototilling and plowing, they could be, if they're doing that too much, there's always this sort of just right balance of things. But like if you're rototilling and plowing and stuff like that a lot, you could be really hurting your soil biology. And then another conventional farmer right next door who's not doing that, but maybe he sprays some insecticide, or maybe he does some other things that wouldn't be considered organic. Or conventional farmer could have higher quality carrots at the end of the day.
As a consumer, is there any way to buy intelligently to try to get more of these phytonutrients? Like, can you visually look at it, or is there somewhere you can look online, or if you're at a farmer's market, are there certain questions you could ask the farmer?
Yeah, so there's this one sort of buzzword in farming now that you hear a lot about. It's called regenerative farming. Um, and that's sort of like, doesn't mean exactly organic, but it's doing things that it's like a host, a kind of a basket of practices that are doing things to um, grow food with less tilling, with less chemicals, and improving the soil biology and sequestering carbon as you go along, that kind of fall into that. But I mean, the reason to buy organic produce, the organic system is basically a way to ensure there's less toxic pesticide residue on your food,
Mm-hmm.
which has huge health implications also, I think. To be eating less chemicals is good. So I mean, I kind of fall on the line of that's if I'm going to buy corn chips, I'm going to buy in the grocery store. I want to buy the organic ones because it'll have less pesticide
Hmm.
residue on it. But still, corn chips aren't that good for you, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, but there's not. So that's that organization I mentioned, the Bionutrient Food Association. Sorry, it just started raining outside. That's why I was looking out the window.
How you could.
Um, it just kind of started dumping, which in Colorado is not as normal as in Washington State, I
Yeah.
think. Um,
We get plenty of
but
rain here.
the Bionutrient Food Association, they're actually working on building this meter. It's kind of like a cell phone size thing that bounces light off of.
That's pretty cool.
It's kind of, and I think it's my understanding is it's like not dissimilar from the way like astronomers when they look at a star, they can tell that star is made out of like hydrogen and helium and nickel or whatever's in
Interesting.
the star based on the wavelengths of light that are bouncing back from it.
Yeah.
And so what this organization is trying to do is basically like create this database of, okay, we have lots of samples of carrots and we're measuring all the different nutrients in them from all these different farms all across the country and then actually internationally too. And then we want to try to correlate that with the spectrum of light that is being bounced back off of them so that eventually like a consumer could like eventually it could, I think that where they want to get in 5 years or whatever is like a smartphone app where you can use your smartphone camera to take a picture of this cucumber and this carrot in the grocery store, and it'll tell you, okay, this is good, this is junk, like this
Hmm.
is, and then because right now there's not a lot of incentive for the growers, for the farmers to be doing these things to improve the quality of the food because they're not getting paid for it. The farmers get paid for quantity. You get paid for
Right.
how many pounds of broccoli you're getting
Hmm.
off of your field, not for how many milligrams of whatever, of some sort of sulfur antioxidant that are in your broccoli. But so this would be a way to like kind of have more feedback in the marketplace, to have a more transparent kind of marketplace. Like there's no broccoli is not ever going to be bad for you, right? But there's some that's going to be better.
Hmm.
And there's a I think there's a chunk of the population that would pay more for better quality
Yeah.
broccoli, and then that could be great because then those growing practices then are going to sequester more carbon, and if that kind of thing takes off, then that could have a lot of bigger implications, I think.
Yeah. I was just reading a book called Outlive. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
Yeah.
it's by a guy named Peter Tia. He's a doctor, a longevity expert, but his whole thing is the health span. So um it's a really cool book, but he's talking about how to elongate the health span. And one thing that's a common theme is just overall caloric consumption. Trying to reduce that while still getting all your macro and micronutrients. But it seems like that would be a great way to do it is if you're sourcing food that has higher levels of nutrients, you could eat less volume of food, less calories overall, and still meet your body's requirements. That would reduce overall inflammation and, according to Peter Attia, increase the health span, which is how long you can live into your life. Interesting. So it's one thing you kind of mentioned in the beginning, and I mean, I obviously know your history, but so you didn't grow up on a farm. You didn't grow up thinking about all these things that you think about now. You might not remember, but how do you feel just like on a daily basis, like with the food consumption that you eat now versus before you had all these thoughts kind of bubbling in your head? Like, do you feel different? Do you feel better? Do you have more energy when you eat well?
I think so. I think I notice the difference now if I eat junky, like if I'm traveling and I eat at a restaurant more or something like that. I definitely
Hmm.
don't. It's not as good as when you're eating more healthy at home. Like we eat a lot of vegetables and beans and things like that. Beans are that's one of the things I've learned a lot about in school is how like kind of the power of the bean, and I've tried to incorporate that more into my diet as well. I mean, I eat meat also now, but yeah, just in terms of like the fiber. And I think I don't know, when I think back to being a kid, though, I don't think I ate a lot of kind of typical food as a kid, but I think when you're a kid you just don't notice the difference really.
Yeah.
But my thought is kind of like as I'm in my 40s now, as I'm aging, you maybe notice the differences more when your body's less resilient.
Yeah,
So
it's
and so maybe it has a bigger effect. Like um, you can have more benefits maybe from eating well as you age later into life. I think,
yeah,
and
it's
maybe that'll get me the longevity zone
yeah,
of
exactly.
living longer.
It's I had the experience of going to the mountain schools. I was a junior in high school, and 80% of the food that all the kids ate came from the campus. So we had cattle, we had pigs, everything, turkeys, and then also a full farm with all kinds of veggies. And so it was, and it was interesting since it was like a pretty strict A/B test where like the month before I went to the mountain school, I was just eating my normal diet, and then as soon as I went to the mountain school, like it was nothing. It was in the middle of nowhere, Vermont, so I was only eating the food from that campus. And ever since then, I've noticed when I go back to eating and I still eat bad food sometimes. I try to eat good food as much as I can, but um just having that strict kind of like one day I was eating one way and then the next day I was in Vermont eating a different way, it really kind of clarified for me like how you can feel differently. That's kind of why I was asking that question.
So do
um
you feel like, I'm curious, do you feel like you notice like on a day to day or week to week basis, if you have a week of being healthier, or eating healthier, you feel like your body feels differently or you're more alert or things like that? Like
yeah,
it's a shorter feedback loop.
yeah, I think I have a sensitive stomach, so if I eat something that doesn't agree with me, I'll notice a couple hours later. So there's that. One thing that's interesting though, I know there's like a research that if you're underslept, if you haven't been well rested, you're not aware of the effects. You can go into test and your cognitive and physical abilities aren't the same as a well rested version of you, but you're not aware of it. It's kind of like like the person who's had a few drinks and they're like, I'm good to drive home when everyone knows they're not, but like they're not like aware of how effective they are. It's the same kind of thing. So it's kind of like when I've been eating well, I feel good. And I'm like, oh, like I haven't been eating well. I really wasn't feeling good, but I'm not always aware of like how poorly I am feeling until I've shifted for a couple of days or a couple of weeks into a good eating routine. So it's part of it's the acute realization, like, oh, my stomach hurts. I ate something that isn't agreeing with me. But then there's that other part where like I'm not necessarily aware of how bad I am feeling until I shift to a healthier regimen.
Mhm.
Um, so it's a little bit of both, a little bit long term, a little bit short term.
What
Um,
does that look like for you? Like as far as eating well, like does that mean like going to the grocery store more or to just make sure there's better stuff around or what is?
yeah, I'm I've had stomach issues, like, and it's kind of been an ongoing issue for me. So it's at this point I pretty much only eat from the grocery store. If I go out for food, it's at the hot bar at Whole Foods or something like that, which is it's somewhere in between. I would say like a traditional restaurant and groceries, that you're cooking. So and a lot of it for me has to do with protein. I work out a lot, so if I'm not eating adequate protein, my body just starts breaking down. Um, and that's actually something I wanted to ask you about. But yeah, so when I'm eating well, I'm eating high protein and high fruits and veggies. Relatively low like refined carbs. I don't eat a lot of bread. I don't eat a lot of really grains in general. Because it just kind of doesn't agree with my stomach. I guess I don't know. Um, yeah. Well, and I guess I'll flip that question back to you. Like, what is your when you're eating well, when you're feeling good? What does your diet look like?
Um, I mean, I feel like the grocery store is a big gateway. Like if I bring
Yeah.
chips home from the grocery store, then I'm gonna just eat the bag of chips like that. So I
Yeah.
feel like I try to really focus when I'm in the grocery store and not go
Yeah.
there when I'm hungry. Um,
Yeah.
but I think as far as like dietary rules or guidelines, I think like avoiding like stuff with added sugar or white sugar and white flour
Mhm.
are kind of two of the big no. So we eat a lot of like whole wheat bread or things like that, but we try to like keep the white flour out. And meat that we eat, we try to get it locally, or if and like grass finished. Or we were in like a meat CSA for a while, but we're not in that anymore. But just have it be like grass fed meat as opposed
Yeah.
to as opposed to the more typical stuff. And we use the Instant Pot like once a week to make a big thing of beans that I'm the type of person where if it's like there's a big pot of beans in the refrigerator, I'll just eat that because I don't want it to go bad and waste it. So I try to like force myself to, so which is kind of cool. So Sky is pretty used to eating beans like probably once a week he'll have beans for dinner. Which I think is pretty good. And eat a lot of eggs as well. And then just, like veggies, like we're kind of, I think having a kid, it's a little bit different where we kind of like stick to the staple veggies of, cucumbers and carrots and tomatoes. And then whatever we cook at home, I tend to just throw some hot sauce on to make that to differentiate the kid food from the adult food. I don't really so it's just easier to make the same thing for everybody, right? Than to cook different meals. But, kids tend to have a simpler palate or whatever, so it's better for flavors and things. But
I didn't mention, but sugar I think is a big thing for me. I try to. There's a lady, Dr. Rhonda Patrick. She's like one of these online health coaches, but she's really good. Everything she puts out has cited research behind it, and I've been following her for a while. And her recommendation is 25 grams of added sugar per day as the max. I try to stick to that. I really like dark chocolate and I really like kombucha. So I try to keep my whole added sugar allocation to those two things. And I've been trying to experiment with there's a kombucha brand I like that uses honey. It uses fermented honey. It's called Honey June. On that note, I try to avoid stevia and monk fruit, even though they're kind of like the new best artificial sweeteners, or I don't even know. I guess they're not really artificial, but they are refined versions of stevia leaves and monk fruit. So when you're buying sweet stuff, you're trying to avoid sugar as much as you can. What do you like? Maple syrup, honey, or how do you go about that?
It's more maple syrup and honey, but we just try to not we made pancakes for breakfast this morning, and we put yogurt or applesauce on the pancakes instead of maple syrup.
That's cool.
I feel like I think sweets are definitely something that the more you eat sweets, then the more your taste buds are acclimated to it. So and there were strawberries in the pancakes, I guess, too, for sweetness as well. But,
so fruits.
But it seems like I agree with you that all the research that I read, sugar is basically poison for inflammation and purposes, and just tears your body apart, and it's also addictive. So it's that's a tough thing.
I've heard
and it's ubiquitous, everywhere you go. Every checkout line in the grocery store or whatever, there's sugar everywhere.
I know. Going back to the Outlive Peter Attia guy and bringing that part of the discussion back, all refined sugars, there's very little nutrients that you actually need, and so it's pretty much all caloric intake without the nutrients that are actually going to support your health. So it's only just going to add to that inflammation. It's not going to really help you get anywhere with it.
I think fiber is another thing that going back to school has made me more aware of, that I just wasn't on my radar at all a year ago. Just looking at just learning about because my program is horticulture, and it's called horticulture and human health. So it's kind of like the intersection between, plants and what do you need to eat, and how do we, how plants can be used to make people healthier. But just seeing how much fiber I eat in a day, or what, and it's kind of tracks along with fruit and vegetable consumption, how most people don't get enough fiber, and then that I didn't really understand what fiber was for. I thought it was to help you go to the bathroom, but it's mostly to help feed the microbiome inside in your GI system. And then learning about all the things that all the bacteria inside your body do as for health is pretty wild. There's a lot of I don't know if you haven't watched. There's a lot of cool TED Talks on all the different things, your microbiome health effects of having a diverse microbiome, and from mental. It's kind of amazing, like, because I guess 10% of your nervous system is in your stomach, so there's all these connections between like mental health and anxiety and depression
Hmm.
and your like the diversity of species in your GI system. Um, and so the fiber, especially the soluble fiber that you get from like bananas and beans and things like that, are food for those guys. So
Yeah, I just read something about that as well. Since same kind of thing, I knew of fiber, but I didn't really have an understanding of it, and it was pretty much the same thing you just said. But you don't actually get the nutrients from the fiber yourself. It's mostly just to cater to the microbiome. Um, I thought that was pretty interesting as well, since I
yeah,
never heard that. Um, Interesting. So let's talk about protein for a little bit. So you said you're big into beans, and then you also mentioned you're eating meat. I know at one point, a little while back, I remember you called yourself a snootitarian, which I just thought was kind of a funny term, meaning that like you were very picky about which meat you would eat, and I think you like to know the farmer and kind of have a an understanding of how the animal lived its life. So I guess where are you at now with meat, and then in a more general sense, um, how do you think about protein and how then kind of bringing it all together? How does the growing the food contribute to the end protein quality and quantity?
yeah. I think I'm kind of still there. I think with Sky, he's 6 now, so we use the term happy meat more than
Happy meat, nice.
just to like we want to there's all kinds of multiple benefits of having an animal live a life that evolved to live. Like, so if
Hmm.
it's a pig or pork or
Interesting.
bacon, like you want it to live somewhere that it can root around and dig in the dirt and have access to space and things like that. And yeah, so kind of in the same place there. I definitely noticed in my, like we eat a lot of oatmeal for breakfast, and like, but on days when I eat oatmeal for breakfast, I'm hungry like 2 hours later, 3 hours later
Hmm.
for lunch. Like I want to eat lunch at 10
Yeah,
a.m. not later. And but days that I eat eggs, I'm good for the morning.
yeah.
Um,
I've read about that too. The high protein intake for the first meal of the day, it affects the hunger cravings for the rest of the day.
but then oatmeal is really good for all the fiber side. So that's why I try to make
Interesting.
uh, Sky and I make us eat that also. So it's kind of so we make oatmeal and sausage a lot for breakfast. So
There you go.
like,
It's a good one.
and
Hedge.
like any kids, Sky wants to eat cereal all the time. So we try to like do every like oatmeal cereal kind of alternate on the
Hmm.
weekdays to do every other to try to thread that needle. But
And then what about beans? What beans do you like to eat? And how do you
um, so we
where
eat
do you get them?
canned beans, but mostly dry beans that I like soak overnight and then just cook in the instant pot, like the slow. It was basically like we had a. I got used to cooking beans like in an old crock pot slow
Hmm.
cooker thing, but then that broke, and then Liz's brother had given us an instant pot a number of years ago that I just it had a lot of buttons, so I was intimidated by it. So, but then when the crock pot died, I was like, oh, there's literally only one button you have to push. It's not that hard.
Yeah, I'm the same
Um,
way. I'm a slow adopter of new things.
yeah, but yeah, no, and it's actually so much better than the crock pot because you can do the pressure cooker thing and all. But yes, usually it's like we call it bite of beans because when Sky was little, we would kind of like stick the spoon in his mouth and say, "Have a bite of beans."
Yeah.
And now the dish is called bite. Sorry, I'm stuttering. Bite of beans, and so it's basically just soak the beans overnight, and then the next morning, like before I go to work or before the first thing of the day, just chop up whatever veggies are in the fridge, like carrots or beets or potatoes or whatever, and then onions or garlic, and then just throw it in there and I can just cook it until dinner time, and then it's done. And so it's always different and a little bit, but we get a lot of different kinds of beans. Sometimes we order them online from like different heirloom bean places, or just from like regular pinto beans from the grocery store too.
Okay. Um. All right. Shifting gears a little bit, but what I know like United States back in the day came out with like the perfect plate and they organized it by color. I'm wondering, do you think about color? Do you like, I mean, carrots are red, tomatoes are, or carrots are orange, tomatoes are red. Do you think about color? Do you try to balance the colors or do you just kind of eat whatever's in season?
I think yeah, the variety aspect is important, especially from like the phytonutrient side of things. Like those a lot of those colors are correlated to different antioxidants and things like that. So it is um, like one of the other kind of interesting things that I've been learning about in school is how like the diversity in your diet, like having a more diverse diet is more cancer protective and anti-inflammatory
Interesting.
than eating a lot of any one fruit or vegetable. Um,
Interesting. I
but
didn't
the
know that.
diversity is kind of the best way to measure it is sort of botanical diversity. So like I don't know if you know like broccoli and cauliflower and kale and cabbage are all the same species of plant.
I didn't know
They're
that.
all like yeah, they're all like they could all interbreed and
Interesting.
so they're all it's like the same plant but it was bred to have bigger leaves or it was bred to have a bigger flower bud or you know but it's the same genus and species. And so it's better for you from an anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory perspective to eat broccoli plus carrots plus beets, say, than it would be to have like broccoli plus cauliflower plus kohlrabi or something that's also like a close brassica cousin.
Interesting.
Um, one of my professors just did like a big that's like kind of what he's known for is like doing these studies about dietary diversity and having like so I think 18 species a day is what is like the number that he's figured out is like what people what like the recommendation. So in terms of like, but that's including like grains and so like wheat, you know, if you have wheat, corn, apples, raisins, you know, like the whole kind of in a
Yeah.
day, but it doesn't not necessarily like a full serving size of all those, but like a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
is, including like spices and things like that.
Including spices. That
So he's
spices is
seeing,
something I wanted to ask about as well. Um, Spices, they're just their taste is a lot stronger than veggies, right? You need a few sprinkles and it affects the meal the same way like a pound of broccoli is going to affect the flavor of the meal, right? Um, why is that? Is it more nutrient dense, or do you know what is going on there?
I mean, I think that, yeah, well, not nutrient dense, but maybe more like in terms of those like they're called the general category like in is sort of so there's like primary plant metabolites would be like the carbohydrates, the fat, the protein, and then the secondary metabolites would be like the terpenes, the antioxidants, polyphenols, like all those other kind of nutritional buzzword type things. Something that you
Hmm.
see sometimes, and a lot of the spices that like think about like oregano or thyme or things that have are very like they have strong smell like terpenes are the smell molecule,
Okay.
and so those things like oregano or whatever they have a lot of terpenes and thing in them so they're kind of concentrated in those and so a little bit of oregano goes a long way but
Yeah.
and so consequently like a little bit of those things can have a pretty good and you know are good sources of a lot of those molecules for your body so like when we make the beans or whatever I'll throw in oregano and thyme or rosemary or whatever
Hmm.
they're you know just to like get more diversity into the soup pot that way and you don't really notice it when you're eating it too much but
Interesting. Um, do you have any experience with hydroponics or like just non-soil cultivation, or what are your thoughts on all that? Since I have very little experience, I just know it's a thing. I've heard it's efficient space-wise for growing, but I don't know what
yeah
the end product is like.
I'm kind of anti but from both the eating side and the grower side. The farmer and the fish, the restaurant farm that I worked at before Sky was born. Um, the restaurant was open year round, so the owners wanted to build a greenhouse to grow food in the winter. So we built a hydroponic greenhouse, and so I got to kind of see firsthand. I'd never done it before, so it was like a matter of like reading the textbooks and then building the
Yeah.
systems and stuff. So basically, you're using water soluble nutrients. There's not really an organic way to grow hydroponically, so they're not generally like certified organic. But also, So I mean, there's pros and cons to everything. So space wise, you can grow a lot of lettuce, say in a small, in per square foot, you can grow a lot of
Hmm.
lettuce in a small area. And if it's heated and you have, add heat and you add electricity for grow lights, you can do that year round. So you can grow a lot of food in a small
Gotcha.
space, but it's pretty resource intensive, like capital intensive to build these hydroponic. Like there's a lot of I think a lot of times you see articles about like vertical farms where they grow
Hmm.
like upwards, well they'll have like stacks and stacks of things. A lot of those grow out of business in not too long, like once the initial capital runs out, because they're very fragile systems. Like if one little thing goes wrong, then there's sort of this cascade of things that are it's hard to get back without like
Yeah.
nuking the whole thing, like without like bleaching the entire greenhouse and then starting over, like once you have a disease
Gotcha.
outbreak. um, Whereas growing in the soil I kind of prefer, because I feel like it's more resilient. Like you have all these different species and microbes and fungi and bacteria and insects all kind
Yeah.
of trying to find and if you can find the right balance of things, then you can proceed and grow what you want to grow. But um, I think nutrient wise, it seems like they're less nutrient, like it's less nutrient dense than their counterparts grown in soil in general. Um, but also, but even though they're conventional, a lot of times because they're in a greenhouse, there's less pesticides that are used. So that I think that's one of the big pluses is on the chemical pesticide side for hydroponics. That um, So what we did at Farmer and the Fish was we would release beneficial insects. Basically, we would get like predator insects, and then every week we would release a batch of whatever predator, whatever thing we were worried about. If it was aphids or spider mites, whatever, we would get a predator for that and just release them, so that to kind of create a more diverse ecosystem in the sort of sterile hydroponic system. So if there was aphids, that were coming along, there would be predators for them to keep the population in check.
Is that how you like to manage the predator? Like, do you typically like to get predators to protect the plants? I mean, since I know you're more of an organic farmer, like, how do you protect the plants without
Yes.
chemicals?
Yeah, so in like on a a dirt farm or garden kind of situation, having a variety of flowers blooming for as long of a period of time, to have early and middle and late season flowers blooming to will attract a lot of basically you want to have more habitat.
Yeah.
So the more heights of plants and the shapes of leaves, and that's one of the things I'm trying to figure out at the new farms I'm working at now, is how do we grow these like big quantities of food that Denver Public, there's 40,000 kids every day that come show up for lunch, and how do we grow a large amount of food but try to figure out how to incorporate the habitat side of things. And that you can do that lots of different ways. You can have like buffers on the outside edges of the farm. You can have where areas that you're not using to grow cucumbers, you can have that be flowering. But also you can, within the bed, it's called interplanting, so you can have cucumbers or vines, they can grow straight up a trellis. But then there's that rest of the soil, you can have other things, other flowers and things like that are happening like down below,
Interesting.
to kind of the more you want to mimic like a healthy ecosystem.
Yeah. It
Better.
what you're mentioning here, it kind of reminds me of what you were saying about your meat choices when you're saying that you try to think what animals are living the life that they're evolutionarily designed for. Same kind of thing with
Mhm.
the farm. Like, what's the natural evolutionary balance that these crops would typically be growing in or could be growing in, and how to mimic that as closely as possible. Um, I have one question for you. This might be a hard question, but if you were in charge of Kansas, if someone put you in charge of Kansas or something like that, where there's I've done road trips and it's just cornfields and soybean fields in every direction as far as you can see. What would you what would be your approach to like getting Kansas or wherever, just a large place like that that's been kind of using these modern growing techniques? How would you shift it over time, and what would be the end goal? That might be a big one to answer, but
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a hard question. I mean, I think you'd have to start really thinking about what did it look like 500 years ago, and it's mostly, it was prairie with I don't know how many 10 million or however many bison were there, and that might really be the best way to grow food on because it's Kansas is pretty dry.
Hmm.
And so, in order to water all of the corn farms and wheat, there's a lot of wheat farms in Kansas too. Is you had they're pumping groundwater out of the aquifer, and that's not that's oh that solution is only going to work for a certain number, maybe another decade or something or however long, until that's dry, and then that everything turns to dust again. Um, and or maybe turn like that. Organization that's trying to figure out how to turn wheat into a perennial. So
Yeah.
so you have more perennial ecosystem is maybe the other way to do that. But also, I mean, thinking about like where is that corn being used for? Like if there's so much food waste in the country. I think it's like 40% of the food that's grown is wasted. So like, what was the point of growing that food anyway? And
Yeah.
all the trouble you went to for that, or a big chunk of the corn crop goes to ethanol, which is kind of dubious in terms of like the cost benefit for environmental benefit of using ethanol versus the all the inputs into growing it. I think I don't know everything I've read. I'm not an expert in it or anything, but it seems like maybe it's not worth it.
Hmm.
And then the other big chunk of the corn crop goes to feed animals in feedlots, which is also dubious as well. So I think there's a big argument to make to thinking about what it looked like 500 years ago and, having more perennials, having more grazing. Um, but the other thing is there's a lot more people, a lot more mouths to feed on the planet than 500 years ago. But I think you can do that using these other kind of systems. The other thing I'm reading a lot now about is called systems called agroforestry, where you incorporate trees into growing systems. So like that could look like, not maybe like rows of nut trees in a pasture where cows are grazing. So like you get the yield from the nut trees, but then you also get shade for the cows. And so you think about those like mutual benefits, or like an orchard, but having like, rows of apple trees and then maybe rows of cucumbers and then rows of apple trees and then rows of cucumbers to kind of, increase the diversity and, think about what it's all kind of goes along with looking what does the landscape want to be with the amount of rain that falls on the area and seeing what you can do with that. um, it seems like all these farms in Arizona are might not be around for a lot longer,
Yeah.
that are all growing all of these water intensive crops, and but it's a complicated thing. Like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be growing alfalfa and things like that in Arizona, but also compared to somewhere in I'll just to like to make up a number. So maybe in like Washington, where you're at, maybe a farmer can get like 3 cuttings of alfalfa hay to feed livestock. But maybe in Arizona, where there's no frost, you can get 6 cuttings or something like that. So you can be more productive because the weather's warmer, but you don't have the water. But then on the other hand, then that a lot of that alfalfa is exported to like Saudi Arabia is a big importer of hay because in Saudi Arabia is a desert, right? So there's no they actually have you're not allowed to use water to grow alfalfa in Saudi Arabia
Wow.
because there's not enough water. There's only water basically for people to drink. There's not a lot of water for agriculture. That's what most of our water we use for agriculture. And so then we're just exporting our limited water to, they have money but
Yeah.
not water in Saudi Arabia. So we're just making that trade, and that's maybe not the best
Yeah.
trade. I don't know.
Interesting. Um, Earlier you mentioned some TED Talks about the microbiome. Uh, if you can find those, I'd love to check them out if you can shoot me the links. But
Yeah, we'll
uh,
do for sure.
it's other than that, are there books, are there talks that you'd recommend just that have contributed to your mindset that you have now? Maybe
No,
not like the super complicated textbook ones, but more that could have
no. Yeah,
mass
I think
audience.
I think TED Talks are great. I mean, I think if I have like an extra 20 minutes that I want to kill on a computer, that's a lot of times what I do is go to the TED website and
Yeah,
learn something different. I'm trying to think. Yeah, like I mean, just if you kind of Google that term agroforestry, I just read this book. What was his name? It's called Restoration Agriculture by Mark Shepard, or read. I think I listened to it on tape actually
hmm
when I was driving. But
it's
um,
the same. I always say red, but
yeah.
it's always listed.
Restoration Agriculture by Mark Shepard is this book that where I learned a lot about this agroforestry technique. So this guy is in Wisconsin, and I think he maybe has 100 acres, and he basically figured out how to have like way more yield from his of food from his 100 acres. Like comparing if he was just growing corn for the 100 acres, but he has apple trees and nut trees and cows and pigs and chickens and kind of the whole spectrum where the yield of any one particular thing, like maybe he has 10 cows, and 20 pigs and 100 chickens or whatever, whatever the numbers are, and the combined yield of food is way way greater doing this kind of mixed system than it is just kind of with the monoculture system.
Interesting. So it's
So
all
I think
about
that's really interesting.
balance. Do you think that I don't know if you'd mentioned it in the book, but do you think he was able to keep the phytonutrients and all those levels high, like that we're talking about earlier in the conversation, whilst like we're it seems like there's a not a direct trade-off, but there is some trade-off between
Yeah.
yield and nutritional content.
Yes, I don't know if he's measuring that. I mean, that's kind of like one of the things that like I think scientists don't quite know like why the phytonutrients vary a lot. Like there's this one other guy with like TED kind of like YouTube videos. He's a agronomist, so he like helps. He's like has a business to help farmers grow higher quality food. His name is John Kempf, Kempf, and he has a company but he does a lot of talks and things like that. And he kind of attributes it to you need to have the biology, but you also need to have the minerals in the soil. So you need to have the right balance of like sulfur and calcium and all those different elements in the soil. Like plants need a few dozen different elements in certain, and it's like the ratios, not just the absolute number, but the ratios are all important there. But I think this is kind of one of the things science hasn't quite figured out, like why exactly can one farmer grow a carrot that's way better than another farmer. They're kind of still trying to figure that out now. But it seems like it has a lot to do with the soil biology. It's kind of like a biology. It's not an either or. It's like it's
Hmm.
biology and also chemistry probably as well.
Yeah,
So if the
that's.
elements aren't there, then the bacteria won't be there to trade them to the plant with.
Hmm.
So um,
I'm reading a book about the microbiome of the skin right now. I have eczema, so I'm trying to kind of figure out the dynamics of how that works. But a lot of what you're saying reminds me of that. There's a microbiome of the skin where there's all, and it's the book is kind of describing how it's not necessarily like high levels of what was so-called bad bacteria leads to acne or leads to eczema or just other skin breakouts, but it's often an imbalance of there's just the ratio of the different uh, microbes gets
mhm.
out of whack. So it's not necessarily like you might like someone with a bad skin outbreak might have a similar profile to someone like they might have the same microbes living in their skin as someone who has healthy skin, but the ratio would be different.
Mm.
Um, there's definitely some crossover there.
Yeah.
I think that the microbiome of the gut, the skin, and the soil. I think that's going to be the next wave of things. It seems like it's at least for me, it's becoming more prevalent in the things I'm reading. I think there's definitely something there. Um,
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I mean, there's just so much fascinating stuff to learn about. This is one of the cool thing I just was reading about was there's this professor at Rutgers called his name is I think James White, and he sort of discovered this whole new way that plants get nutrients that like no one really knew about before. It's called the rhizophagy cycle. So the rhizosphere is like the area around plant roots where there's different species of bacteria compared to like further away from the roots. because the plant is like cultivating and trading different hormones and metabolites with the bacteria, and kind of cultivating a different, it's kind of the same way in our GI system. We kind of cultivate different microbes in there. But basically, the plant roots are growing. They're actually like swallowing the bacteria, and then inside the body of the plant, they're like dissolving the membrane of the bacteria, and then extracting the nutrients out that they want. And then the species that they don't like, they kill. And then the species that they do like, they spit out further out the root hairs. And then those, so kind of like over time, will change the population of bacteria in the soil to be more like what the plant wants. So the plant is like kind of like culturing and growing bacteria that will help it for like further help it along, just kind of. And so you usually,
So
like when you
cool.
read in like textbook, when I taught soil, it was like plants get nutrients as like ions, like chemical ions that are dissolved in the soil solution, kind of like hydroponics. The way, so it'd
Mhm.
be like a calcium ion goes into the plant because there's a concentration gradient. Like there's more calcium in the soil solution than inside the root. So diffusion or osmosis would bring it in. This is like a whole new way that like we just kind of was like just discovered how plants feed themselves. And so I think I know there's just in all these areas, I think there's a lot to be discovered.
Yeah, it's I'm interested in all this stuff. I'll definitely check that out. All the links to the resources you're mentioning here, I'll include them in the description wherever this
Cool.
and all the places this video gets posted to. So if people are watching and they want to check it out, they can just click the links below. But yeah, that's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you think is an important aspect of all this?
Um,
It's always hard
I
to
mean, I think
remember that.
just like remember, I think like for me, it always like comes down to like this side of like nutrition and things like that is like the moment where I can like make decisions is like when I'm at the grocery store of
Yeah,
like so if I have stuff in the fridge, like I'll want to eat it before it goes bad. So like for me, it's like I try to remember when I'm at the grocery store. Oh, I want to buy a variety of different things. Not like don't just get carrots and cucumbers, but throw a couple other more random things in the basket as well. And then I know that I'll like my personality will make me eat them later, even if they're not the high priority thing. So
yeah. I try to do the same thing, and also what you mentioned earlier, not going to the grocery store hungry, since then it becomes more of emotional decision making rather than
yeah,
logical decision making. Um, awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time here, and you give me a lot to think about. I'll check out those resources you mentioned. It's all, even though I'm not like specifically into farming, it's really related to. It's all and everything's interconnected, and you're kind of showing me some of those links for the things I'm interested in and how that all relates to the food we eat, the soil it's grown in, all that. So it's pretty fascinating to me.
yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, diet and disease and nutrition and they're all it's all related. In terms of all the like the causes of all the like cancer and diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Like a lot of them all have their roots in nutrition and what we're eating and how it's grown, and so yeah,
Yeah,
it's cool.
awesome. Well, I'll cut the recording here.